A government can do something no household can do. It can spend today and create the money afterward. That sounds like a superpower, and it is, until you see what the power costs. Imagine two doors inside a treasury building. One door reads, borrow. Behind it sits a room full of lenders, pension funds, banks, insurance companies, wealthy households, foreign investors. They carry calculators, contracts, and sharp memories. They lend only if they believe you will repay in money that still buys something real. The other door reads print. Behind it is a quieter room, not just a printing press but a central bank balance sheet. With a keystroke, new reserves appear. No auction, no bond buyers demanding a higher rate, no questions asked in the moment. So why doesn't every government choose the second door every time? Because borrowing has a visible price, printing has an invisible price, and invisible prices are easy to ignore, right up to the moment they show up everywhere. Here is the core truth. Borrowing is limited by other people's willingness. Printing is limited by trust. Borrowing is a negotiation with lenders. Printing is a negotiation with everyone who uses your currency: workers, businesses, retirees, importers, and foreign trading partners. The first negotiation happens in a market. The second happens in daily life. To see the difference, start with what borrowing actually does. Picture a government bond auction. Dealers sit at screens, orders come in. The state offers promises, lend us money now, we will repay later plus interest. The bidders decide the price of that promise. If they trust you, they accept a low interest rate. If they doubt you, they demand more. When the government borrows, it is mostly pulling existing savings out of the system. A pension fund buys bonds using contributions it already holds for retirees. A bank buys treasury bills using deposits it already collected. A household buys a bond instead of buying a new appliance. The government gains spending power, but that spending power came from somewhere. It is a transfer across time. The government spends now, and taxpayers service the debt later. Printing is different. Printing creates new money claims. It does not wait for someone to save first. It expands the pool of purchasing power in the short run. That is why a government can print more than it can borrow. The constraint is not the size of the savings pool. The constraint is whether the economy can absorb those new claims without breaking confidence. Hold on to this hook. Printing can create money, but it cannot create more fuel, more wheat, more houses, or more hospital beds overnight. If money rises faster than real output, prices do the adjusting. This is the simplest inflation mechanism, too much money chasing too few goods. But inflation is not only a mechanical equation, it is also a story people tell themselves about tomorrow. And that story can change quickly. When people believe money will buy less next month, they act differently today. Workers demand larger wage increases. Businesses raise prices early to protect margins. Savers move into hard assets or foreign currency. Importers raise prices because the exchange rate is sliding. People spend faster because holding cash feels like holding melting ice. Economists call it velocity. Ordinary people call it getting rid of bad money. Once that behavior spreads, inflation becomes self-feeding. Prices rise, so people expect higher prices, so they spend faster, so prices rise again. The printing press may start the fire, but expectations supply the oxygen. That is why printing is limited by credibility, not by ink, paper, or server capacity, by belief. Now, a crucial detail. Most modern printing happens by buying government bonds. The central bank creates new reserves and uses them to purchase treasury securities, usually from banks and investors. The government still issues bonds, but the buyer is effectively a money creator. This is why the boundary between printing and borrowing can blur. If the central bank is financing deficits persistently, the public senses monetization, and credibility becomes fragile. Here is another hook. You can disguise printing as borrowing, but you can't disguise inflation from a grocery bill. It also helps to separate three different things people call printing. First is cash printing, the physical notes. Second is central bank money, reserves created for banks. Third is bank money, deposits created when banks make loans. In modern economies, most of what you spend is bank deposits, not paper notes. That matters because a government can expand central bank reserves instantly. But broad money expands only if banks and borrowers choose to create credit on top of those reserves. This is why printing is not automatically inflationary. If banks are cautious and households are paying down debt, new reserves can sit quietly in the financial system. Money is created, but it does not chase groceries and rent. Inflation stays subdued. However, if confidence is high, credit is growing, and the government is also spending heavily, the same central bank expansion can amplify demand quickly. The system goes from quiet liquidity to loud prices. Borrowing has another discipline. It forces someone to hold the risk openly. When the state sells bonds, buyers demand disclosure, ratings, and a credible plan. If the plan weakens, borrowing costs rise and the government feels pressure immediately. Printing, by contrast, spreads the burden across everyone holding currency, often without them realizing the transfer. Economists call the revenue from money creation seigniorage. In plain language, it is the benefit the issuer gets when new money buys real goods and services before prices fully adjust. Here is the hook inside that. Seigniorage is easiest to collect once. The more you rely on it, the more people defend themselves and the yield collapses. So the reason you can print more than you can borrow is simple in form and brutal in practice. Printing is limited only by the point at which society rejects your money, while borrowing is limited by the point at which lenders reject your promises. And both limits can arrive. Borrowing has its own limits, but they arrive through a different channel. Borrowing is restrained by interest rates and refinancing risk. If lenders worry, they demand a higher yield. Higher yields raise the government's interest bill. A rising interest bill forces hard choices: cut spending, raise taxes, or borrow even more at worse terms. That feedback is painful, but it is visible. It is a public signal that the market is tightening the leash. Printing tries to bypass that leash. For a while, it can feel like freedom. Then, the leash reappears as inflation, and inflation is often a harsher judge than bond traders. Put a scene on it. Picture a retired teacher living on fixed savings, bond. Yields rising can be discussed on television and debated in Parliament. But inflation hits quietly. The same basket of groceries costs more each week. The retiree's life shrinks without a bill arriving in the mail. That is why inflation is sometimes called a tax, paid through lost purchasing power rather than through a formal receipt, and the tax is not evenly distributed. People with cash savings and fixed incomes feel it first. People who can raise prices or renegotiate wages faster can protect themselves. That unevenness is why heavy printing often becomes politically explosive, even if it begins as help. Now consider the exchange rate channel, which often arrives faster than people expect. If a country prints aggressively, investors may sell its currency. The currency weakens. Imports become more expensive: fuel, fertilizer, medicine, machinery. Those higher import prices spread through the whole economy because transport, farming, and manufacturing depend on them. Even if local wages do not rise, the cost of living rises. This is how printing can turn into a national price shock, especially in countries that import essentials. Borrowing can weaken the currency too, but the mechanism is different. If you borrow in foreign currency, say dollars, your debt is fixed in dollars. If your local currency falls, your repayment burden explodes in local terms. Printing local money does not create dollars. It cannot pay dollar debts unless you can obtain dollars in the market. If confidence is broken, dollars become scarce, and printing becomes a desperate move that pushes the exchange rate down further. Here is the next hook. The ability to print is not the same as the ability to pay. So why do advanced economies sometimes print large amounts without immediate disaster? Because context matters. If the economy has spare capacity, idle factories, unemployed workers, weak demand, extra money can support spending without bidding up prices quickly. In that environment, printing can prevent a downward spiral. It can stabilize banks, keep credit flowing, and stop a recession from becoming a depression. But if the economy is already constrained, supply chains tight, energy prices high, labor scarce, new money collides with scarcity. Then prices rise faster and expectations shift. Printing that was temporary support begins to look like a habit. And once people suspect the habit will continue, they change behavior in ways that accelerate inflation. This is the uncomfortable truth. Printing is easiest when you don't need it. It becomes most tempting when you do. And that is when credibility is most fragile. There is also a sharp difference between countries with strong institutions and those without them. If a central bank is seen as independent, if the government has reliable tax collection, if debt is mostly in local currency, and if the country has a track record of controlling inflation, it can print more before trust breaks. People give it the benefit of the doubt. If institutions are weak, if deficits are chronic, if imports are essential, and if the country has a history of high inflation, trust breaks earlier. People have fewer reasons to believe restraint will return. So the printing limit is lower, not because the printing is different, but because the belief is different. Now, bring borrowing back into focus. Borrowing is not free. Over time, it accumulates. Even a stable government must refinance debt as bonds mature. If interest rates rise, refinancing becomes expensive. If growth slows, the debt-to-income ratio worsens. The pressure builds. Borrowing can end in a crisis too: default, restructuring, austerity, capital controls. Borrowing fails through finance. Printing usually fails through society. When money loses its role as a stable measuring stick, everything becomes harder: wages, rents, contracts, pensions, business planning. People stop thinking in years and start thinking in days. Stability is not only economic, it is psychological. Money is the ruler used to measure value, and if the ruler keeps changing length, people stop building. This is why stable societies treat money as boring. The more boring money is, the more ambitious an economy can be. People sign long-term contracts, businesses invest, families save, retirement becomes thinkable. Printing too much makes money exciting, and excitement is exactly what you do not want in a unit of account. So what should you conclude? Not that printing is always evil, or borrowing is always wise. The real lesson is that each tool has a different kind of constraint. Borrowing is constrained by the well, the pool of savings and the price lenders demand. Printing is constrained by the roof, how much pressure a society can take before prices, wages, and expectations blow out. One constraint is enforced by markets, the other is enforced by reality. So yes, a government can print more money than it can borrow, but it cannot print more trust than its citizens and trading partners are willing to grant. And once trust is damaged, rebuilding it usually costs far more than any short-term relief printing provided. Remember the two doors. Borrowing is a negotiation with lenders. Printing is a negotiation with everyone. And everyone, in the end, votes with behavior. What they buy, what they save, what currency